In the First Anglo-Dutch War, Dutch and English battleships, in miles-long formations, unleashed thousands of broadsides in 2 years of ruinous war, before, finally, a fragile peace. In the decade that followed, the English, tired of civil and religious conflicts, invited their exiled king, Charles II, to return and restore his interrupted monarchy. Upon his restoration, Charles took control of a formidable navy, a navy he believed he could again use against the Dutch to regain his power, prestige, and wealth.
The greater goal of your endeavor is the seizing of Manhattan, so that the Dutch may no longer exercise that trade which they have wrongfully possessed themselves of.
The Dutch leader Johan de Witt soon responded.
To attack, conquer, and ruin the English everywhere! Charles will have his war!
The short, profitable war Charles wanted was not the war he got. His first brilliant victory at sea brought the French King Louis XIV into the war on the side of the Dutch.
The French, under Louis XIV, the strongest power in Western Europe, now come in on the Dutch side and declare war upon Britain. And that means that Charles is back to square one with twice as many enemies as before.
Ships from Louis's navy supplemented De Witt's newly commissioned battleships under the command of the Dutch Admiral de Ruyter. De Ruyter had made the crucial decision to adopt the English in-line battle tactics.
The English formation, unified, in line, using their big guns. They turned in unison. The whole fleet.
With De Witt's shipbuilding program adding dozens of battleships to the Dutch fleet and training with in-line tactics, the Dutch met the English once again in June of 1666 for an epic battle.
These battles are enormous. There's 100 ships on each side. There are thousands of men involved. The battles go on for hours, and in the case of the 4 days, well, you guessed it, 4 days.
The Dutch drove the English fleet from the sea. The Dutch celebrated their victory in the 4 days battle, but this victory, just as so many of the earlier English victories at sea, is ephemeral. No sea battle would decisively win a war if the opposing fleet could sail back to a home port, repair, refit, rearm, and sail again.
Both sides believed that they had done much more damage to the other than they actually had. The Dutch were sure that the English had lost a good 20 or 25 ships, and that the English had been fatally weakened.
But the English had lost only 10 ships. They quickly repair the ships damaged in the 4 days battle and provision several new large ships that had been previously sidelined for lack of men.
The crew of a warship in this period comprises enough sailors to man half of the guns. That's going to be at least 500 men. You'll then have at least 100 soldiers up on the upper deck as Marines. In the main, they'll be using muskets to repel boarders. This is close quarters fighting.
To get full crews, the English Navy resorts to a system called Impressment, legally sanctioned, where teams of sailors are sent to hijack able-bodied men.
Dear Duke, I am mightily troubled all this morning about men that they have pressed these 2 last nights, persons wholly unfit for sea.
We need men. They adapt to the life of the sea. I have lived it. It is not so bad.
But without press money, it is contrary to all course of law.
Are you saying you will not pay them? In war, we have expenses. All are delayed. Pepys, you are the clerk of the Navy. Record it and ensure their press money.
It's really very much up to the captain of each individual ship to send out a gang to find as many men as he can. Once they get out there, once they go into a tavern, for example, and try to recruit seamen, they're likely to meet a certain amount of opposition. which means that there will be huge, great battles in the street, perhaps, that not just the sailors themselves, but their wives and girlfriends, even their children, might get into a battle with the press gang as well.
Press gangs usually haunted seaports. But during war, with severe shortages, even London would get a visit. Sometimes their indiscriminate kidnapping affected the Navy itself.
How about our own men at the Naval Office, pressed by officers of the fleet into the service? Even men on our ordnance ships are pressed while taking powder and cannon shot to the fleet.
Let me know when your men are pressed.
Thank you, your lordship. It is only that I am troubled by Holmes.
In his secret diary, Pepys describes his personal and professional conflicts with Holmes, worrying that Holmes might challenge him to a duel.
Last evening, at Lord Batten's, he said in front of several, he thought my wife the fairest to be fair with.
He said that with ladies present?
No, just among the men. But it vexes me all the same.
Do not worry, Pepys. He has gone to the Isle of Wight in 2 days. Can you defend your wife? Or at least keep her locked up until then?
I can. I hope.
And when the press gangs again act against our common purpose, let me know.
I will. I will.
The impressed crews, over 2,000 men, enable many ships, including the 100-gun first-rate battleships, to join the fleet. Charles sees the greater firepower of this fleet as a way to reverse his bad fortune. With the expenses of the war mounting, he needs one great final battle to destroy the Dutch fleet. Less than 2 months after the 4 days battle, English and Dutch fleets again sail into the North Sea, both looking for a decisive victory.
The English were the stronger, and the Dutch didn't realize it. The winds were very light, so this was a battle that took place literally in slow motion.
The St. James Day battle is classic British naval tactics. Linear combat, firepower, degrade the enemy by bombardment until the enemy breaks and runs. A French observer on the Dutch ship said, look, you'll never beat the English at this because they hold a tight line. They maneuver in close quarters, they're disciplined.
While the English fight to their best tactical advantage, the Dutch make grave tactical errors. De Witt persuades de Ruyter to reserve a few large battleships at the beginning of the battle, a tactic good against a smaller fleet, but disastrous against the larger English fleet. And Tromp, ignoring the battle plan to stay in line, breaks ranks to chase after an English squadron.
It became a major defeat for the Dutch Navy under de Ruyter, perhaps the biggest defeat ever lived to see. So after the battle, de Ruyter was really angry.
Everton, you know I support the Witt and his policies, but his meddling directions were almost as disastrous as Tromp disappearing.
What directions? We fought the English in line.
He asked me to keep some of our flagships from full engagement at the beginning of the battle, which I agreed to because I thought we would outnumber the English.
But they outnumbered us.
We were not prepared for that. They refitted their fleet, added new battleships. My friend, I drove the Royal Charles from the line, but another 100-gun battleship took its place. We could not stand it alone with Tromp gone God knows where.
Outnumbered and outgunned. Where was Tromp?
Here he comes now with the Witt. I too would like to know that.
Tromp, you're back. What happened to you?
Happened? A battle is what happened.
We all agreed to stay in line because we have had some success with this system. Not only were you not in line, but you were nowhere to be seen.
My squadron had the opportunity to take out the entire English Blue Squadron. An opportunity I could not ignore.
But our battle plan was clear. Stay in line. Broadside volleys. Tack together. Stay together. You yourself endorsed this plan and signed it?
I did. But I saw we could take a dozen ships or more, so I went after them.
Where are these ships?
We had not enough time. And after our main fleet retired, their whole fleet came after us. We were fortunate to sail round them to home.
Your new battle plan almost proved to be our undoing. With your ships, we could have matched them broadside for broadside. But when you abandoned your position, you left us exposed. We were fortunate to save the fleet.
But we lost only 2 ships.
2 ships and thousands of men! Men that need not have been killed. Even more, you cost us the battle. We lost when we could have won. And now the English control the channel.
De Ruyter, I know you are angry, but we will refit and rebuild and be ready next season.
Trump, I want your resignation as soon as possible.
But we can work this together.
You have it now.
DeWitt knows that in spite of his best efforts at reconciliation, his political opponents, the Orangists, the party loyal to William of Orange, will blame him for Tromp's dismissal. Tromp himself is an Orangist, and for the Orangists, Tromp is a hero. And DeWitt has other ongoing conflicts with the Orangists.
De Witt has one major problem in his domestic policies, and that is William III. William III is slowly but surely coming of age. The Orangists are once again stirring and demanding more rights for William III, and De Witt is trying to postpone this as much as possible, but he knows that at some stage it would be unavoidable to at least give him something.
But domestic policies can wait. DeWitt's crisis now is the war with England. After the St. James Day battle, Charles' navy is in command of the sea. It can stop any ship from entering or leaving Dutch ports. And the English look for opportunities to damage Dutch commerce.
The English learned from a discontented Dutch captain that there were storehouses at Flyland. The English selected Sir Robert Holmes to destroy the Dutch storehouses.
In the anchorage behind, they find a huge fleet of Amsterdam merchant ships, and they burn the lot. It was reckoned to have been £1 million worth of losses to the Dutch economy.
Holmes, your raid has destroyed more Dutch ships than all our battles. How many ships burnt?
150, with a few guard frigates. And the town. We found supplies there and took them. Unfortunately, our men began capturing goods from every house and would not return to ship.
How could you get them back in order and boarded?
With the men in such high spirits, there was only one way. We burned the town. With all possible booty going up in flames, they returned to the ship.
And what are you going to call this great victory, Sir Robert? The Vlee Apocalypse?
Nothing quite so fancy, Your Majesty. Simply, Holmes Bonfire.
This is Sir Robert Holmes's great triumph, Holmes's Bonfire, the English called it. And it's still remembered in Holland as a great disaster.
Before DeWitt can respond to Holmes' escalation of the war on land, a disastrous conflagration destroys the heart of London. The Dutch see it as the hand of God punishing an evil people in retribution for Holmes' Bonfire. With over 10,000 buildings destroyed and thousands homeless, the Great Fire of London is a catastrophe on a scale far beyond Holmes' Bonfire, and for Charles, a financial fiasco. With the Dutch economy in wholesale shambles and the English capital smoldering, Louis XIV sees an opportunity to assert his tenuous claim to territory near the Dutch border.
Louis XIV has ambitions to strengthen his frontier to the north by annexing large parts of what's now Belgium, then the Spanish Netherlands.
In May 1667, Louis XIV finally invaded the Spanish Netherlands, and this was of the utmost importance to Johan de Witt, because Johan de Witt would want to maintain the Spanish Netherlands as a buffer between the Dutch Republic and France.
So although Charles II doesn't do anything to force the Dutch to make peace, this advancing French army undoubtedly does.
De Witt soon agrees with Charles to begin negotiations at Breda in the south of Holland. With negotiations underway, Charles plans to exploit the French buildup on the Dutch border as he reviews naval strategy with his brother James, Duke of York.
James, what options have we this season?
Without more funds, the Navy will not sail. The men are owed 2 years' pay and will not sail again without it. The ships need repair and fitting out, but we have no credit with our suppliers. Perhaps Parliament will vote more funds.
They will not. They will only meddle and fuss. They might even hold those funds already voted. But if we hold out in Breda, we will get a payment from the Dutch to end the war. They feel the hot breath of Louis's army on their southern border.
The English understood the position Johan de Witt was in. He still had this war at hand with the English when his ally was in fact threatening his position. The English negotiators were actually instructed to delay the negotiations as much as they could to build more pressure on de Witt.
We could send some frigates out to raid Dutch merchants in the Channel while protecting our own. But we have little choice but to lay up our big ships in the Medway.
It is a small risk. With peace so close, the Dutch will not expend a fortune to put their fleet to sea for another year.
Charles II is gambling. With a bit of French help, he's going to be able to pull off acceptable peace terms, but meanwhile, Jan de Witt is doing a bit of gambling of his own.
Charles is bankrupt and cannot send his fleet out this season.
We will then blockade him and take all his merchant ships.
Yes, and more. We will attack their fleet as it lies.
But we cannot navigate the Medway. It is treacherous and with tides.
We have hired, and I can recommend to you, our English pilots, now in our service with good knowledge of the Medway.
Though De Witt recruited English pilots as guides, his admirals must still navigate treacherous shoals upriver for miles. It will be 10 miles before they reach the big English ships protected by the guns of Upnor Castle, the major fort protecting the fleet.
But are not their forts and defenses strong?
Sheerness is unfinished. If we get to Upnor, we will have destroyed a dozen ships already.
But before they get to Upnor, downriver, near Gillingham, the Dutch must breach a formidable barrier spanning the Medway, the Gillingham Chain. In a desperate attempt to protect their unmanned battle fleet, the English have barricaded the river with a thick chain. Supported by 4 platforms, the chain forms an underwater barrier, reinforced by half-sunken ships, cables, and broken timbers.
The English fleet is more dangerous at sea than moored in the Medway, and we have many times boldly fought them there.
But have we not already begun our negotiations at Breda for a truce and then a treaty?
We have. But this raid will be our best plenipotentiary for peace.
Charles knows his ships are vulnerable. They have no crews, and their cannons are already in storage ashore.
My illness, the fever and the sweating have come back. It may prevent my going.
We need you, de Ruyter. Go as far as you can and hand over to my brother Cornelis. He will project our plan wisely and well.
Charles soon learns his gamble has failed. The Dutch fleet sails. Charles orders the Duke of Albemarle to command the defense of the Medway. Albemarle deploys guns along the river and moves a few warships to point-blank range at the chain. But the navy that England has depended upon to crush invasions, like the Spanish Armada a century before, still lies immobile and unarmed, while the Dutch fleet, with 10 times the firepower of the Spanish Armada, anchors at the entrance to the Medway. The next day, the Dutch sail into the Medway, easily destroying the weak defenses at Sheerness. But they must still get past the Gillingham chain. At first, the Dutch fleet is dangerously clogged up at the chain. But needing to break through, one ship after another hurls into the chain, but is stopped by the barrier and withering broadsides. Finally, a ship catches a favorable breeze, builds up speed, rams the chain, and breaks it. With the chain broken, nothing can stop the Dutch. Within minutes, they set fire to the ships at the chain, the last English crews surrender, and the Dutch capture the virtually undefended Royal Charles. News of its loss causes pandemonium in London.
No sooner up, but I hear the sad news confirmed of the Royal Charles, which put me into such a fear that at 2 hours' warning I sent my father and my wife into the country by the coach this day, with about £1,300 in gold in their night bag. Pray God give them good passage.
One of the Royal Navy's largest and most prestigious battleships, crucial to victories at Lowestoft and St. James, is now in Dutch hands. That night, without crew or cannon for most of the fleet, Albemarle reinforces Upnor Castle with artillery, which he personally commands. The next day, De Ruyter comes in with men of war and fire ships, packed with flammable oil and stacks of incendiaries. The warships anchor in the gauntlet from hell, engaging the fort and the batteries all day and into the night. The Dutch fire ships are now floating firebombs. Their crews grapple the large English battleships, set them on fire, and leap into lifeboats. On the final day, as Albemarle brings in more heavy guns, the Dutch sail back down the Medway with the Royal Charles.
To capture the fleet flagship, to burn 3 other big ships, was a huge naval victory in itself. But even more than a naval victory, I mean, it would have been one thing if they'd lost those ships in open battle. It would have been bad, but at least it wouldn't have been dishonorable. But to lose them, not even properly defended, it was politically catastrophic for the king.
The English were really in no position to delay negotiations any further. The political and economic and financial damage that Charles and his regime had sustained was enormous. The Dutch, on the other hand, were happy to conclude a peace treaty that would guarantee their trading rights and then take steps to stop Louis XIV from conquering the whole of the Spanish Netherlands.
De Witt wants a quick end to the war. He proposes the 2 most profitable trading areas, Suriname and Pulo Run, remain Dutch. Suriname in South America for sugar production, Pulo Run in the East Indies for valuable spice monopolies. But to ensure fast response, De Witt sweetens the agreement for Charles by ensuring 2 areas remain English: Cape Coast Castle, a center for the slave and ivory trade in Africa, and New York. New York will remain English.
Frankly, the Dutch thought they had bigger economic fish to fry. They were much more concerned with the East Indies and with the West Indies than they were with this tiny and relatively unimportant province where they were losing the demographic battle in any event to the English.
Charles now controls the eastern seaboard of North America from Carolina to Maine.
So one could say that the defeat in 1667 enabled the British to build their empire in America.
But implanted 3 years earlier in surrender terms of the Dutch Director General of New Amsterdam, Stuyvesant, was a crucial guarantee: freedom of conscience. The inhabitants of New Amsterdam, now New Yorkers, had secured a freedom of religious expression enjoyed nowhere else in America. That guarantee would be explicitly renewed several times in the next century, most visibly in the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. The peace after Breda gave both the Dutch and the English the tranquility they needed to rebuild their economies, but neither could ignore the rampant power of Louis XIV. Charles and de Witt form an alliance with Sweden that forces Louis XIV to withdraw from the Spanish Netherlands. Charles still hated the Dutch, but he wanted to teach Louis XIV a lesson. If Louis wanted to take over the Spanish Netherlands, he needed to partner with Charles. Louis is finally persuaded.
The French now want to fight the Dutch. They think the Dutch are becoming a nuisance to them, and it's necessary to annihilate them. Charles thinks that everything has changed. Everything that made him lose the last time is now gone.
This time, Charles will have Louis XIV as an ally, using his massive army against the Dutch. After preliminary diplomacy, they negotiate an alliance through Charles' sister, Henrietta.
Princess Henrietta, Duchess of Orleans, was in fact the youngest sister of King Charles II, and Princess Henrietta's husband was the younger brother of Louis XIV. So it was younger brother marries younger sister, their first cousins, dynastic marriage. And Princess Henrietta and her husband weren't very happy together, and they tried to give her something of a life, making her a diplomat, and they sent her to England in 1670, to Dover Castle, to meet her brother, who was 14 years older, in order to negotiate a treaty on behalf of Louis XIV. Louis wanted to invade and overtake the Spanish Netherlands, and he wanted the agreement that he would do this by land and that Charles II, who had already fought the Dutch, would do the same by sea. And in return, Louis would give Charles II a lot of much-needed cash, but also there was a secret clause, which was that Charles II had to promise to become Roman Catholic.
Charles himself is pretty broad-minded where religion is concerned. Parliament, on the other hand, wants to have a thoroughly intolerant national church which forces everybody to worship in it or get arrested.
While Charles disliked Parliament's harsh religious policies, he did not flirt with Catholicism to promote religious toleration. He wanted financial support from Louis XIV, and to get it, he would promise leniency for English Catholics. And he would even promise to become Catholic himself.
My dearest Minette, I again thank you for your good counsel. We have come a long way from our treaty with the Dutch and Swedes.
You were right to secure your kingdom then. Louis's cold answer was as good as a refusal, but now the league between you and Louis is so durable that nothing in the world shall divide your majesties.
And it was you who convinced him of my resolve to declare myself Catholic and to be reconciled to the Church of Rome. Without the aid of the most Christian king, we would not be able to fulfill this design.
We must, of course, keep the whole matter an absolute secret. Only those that you trust can even know of our plans for the Dutch.
Many understand that a war with Holland would, in all respects, suit with the interests of England.
And we can ensure our nephew William that he will be compensated for any of his losses.
William will be as glad as ourselves to see de Witt gone. Ah! What comes here?
Henrietta took with her her maid of honour, Louise de Keroualle, and the treaty was meant to take 5 days. In fact, they had such a jamboree at Dover Castle, because everybody was there, that the treaty, the time, extended to 14 days. It was a huge party. When the time came to leave, the king and his sister, Princess Henrietta, dreaded saying goodbye, and the princess asked Louise to bring her jewel box to the king.
Now, Charles, what would you like from my jewellery box?
This is the jewel I coveted.
Louise and the princess set off back to France, and Louise was then invited to the English court. And the King of France, Louis XIV, wanted to send her because he wanted to discover if his cousin, Charles II, was really going to become Catholic, and the only way to have a proper spy was a spy in the bedchamber.
In the treaty, Charles got what he wanted most from Louis: money. Hundreds of thousands of pounds for the Navy, enough to refit his 60 biggest ships, and an advance payment of £160,000 for declaring himself Catholic at some unspecified future time.
It's a rather nice example of Charles II's layers of deviousness, actually. If there's one thing that will blow his credit sky high, it's the announcement that he's going to declare himself a Catholic. I mean, he didn't. But what if Louis XIV decides to reveal it?
So the plan is for a surprise attack in which the British attack the Dutch from the sea and the French attack from the land. Also, Charles believes that with this overwhelming victory, he'll be so rich on captured Dutch colonies and Dutch shipping, it'll make him stronger at home. He won't have to ask Parliament for money again.
Charles wants independence from Parliament at home, and through his nephew William of Orange, a controlling influence on the Dutch state.
What Charles hopes to have happen as a result of the Treaty of Dover is to overturn the Dutch Republic and promote his nephew, William of Orange, to be Stadtholder and Captain General of the Netherlands.
As Charles begins his Dutch strategy to replace de Witt, his nephew William III at first is receptive.
Your Majesty, dear Uncle Charles, let me know your desires, and I am confident that as long as they are not hostile to the foundations of this republic, I shall be able to obtain them for you, in spite of de Witt, who will be thereby worsted, while I and my friends, in whom His Majesty can place his trust, will be placed at the helm.
But during a visit later that year, Charles attempts to persuade William to become Catholic. William vehemently rejects Charles' proposal. Becoming Catholic would betray his religion and his country. With William so agitated, Charles decides to keep his grand schemes with Louis XIV secret.
The problem for the Dutch Republic is that the traditional leaders of the Dutch army were the members of the House of Orange. So building up a land army meant giving political power and military power to his political enemies. So what de Witt hoped to do was to have an incredibly powerful navy and the Triple Alliance, which he thought would keep France contained. So he was completely double-crossed and outmaneuvered by Charles II.
De Witt's weak army policy, whatever the motivation, is now his greatest political liability. He can no longer ignore Orangist demands to mobilize an army that William III will now command. He invites William, de Ruyter, and his brother Cornelis into his war cabinet.
The question is not, will there be war, but how soon?
Everton has already beaten off an English attack on the Smyrna convoy.
It's Charles's way of declaring war. He even sent Robert Holmes to lead the attack to make certain we would understand what he meant.
The English declaration will come in the next month.
Our ambassadors report rumors of a French treaty. When I visited Charles last, he denied it, but Louis's army contradicts that now. 80,000 infantry, 25,000 cavalry marching on Maastricht.
That is not a training exercise. The French also will declare soon.
The French outnumber our troops 3-1. When Munster and Cologne invade, our disadvantage will be 4-1.
Our only hope is to split their alliance. De Ruyter, take the fleet and attack the English as soon as possible. The French will not engage. If we can sting the English, they will hate their allies. Roche, send ambassadors to Louis and offer land and money. 15 million guilders if need be to stay his attack. William, mobilize as large an army as possible, prepare the sluices, see if we can hold at any fort or line and reinforce it. Louis will not take our first offer. Gentlemen, we must be ready for a bad year. Cornelis, you know we will be blamed. The Orange's pamphlets call for our heads already, and we're not even at war. Take care.
De Witt knows the Orangists want him and his brother gone. And he also knows that a few of them may resort to violence. But he still hopes for an early naval victory as the war begins in the spring of 1672.
(1672) for the Dutch Republic, what we call the rampjaar, the year of disaster. The country is invaded from the south by France, from the east by the city-states of Münster and Keulen in Germany, and from the west threatened by the combined allied fleet of the English and the French.
So the Dutch are literally on their knees. This army is coming in almost unopposed, and even if it was opposed, it was the best, the biggest army in Europe. They're coming in from the south at the same time that the navy is occupied at sea.
The Third Anglo-Dutch War is very different to the previous two. It's not so much a war about trade, it's a war of conquest. The declared objective of the Allies, and by the Allies I'm talking about England and France, is to literally wipe out the Dutch state. That's what they intend to do.
In a desperate attempt to save the Dutch Republic, De Witt has sent his best admiral, de Ruyter, to attack the combined Anglo-French fleet. This fleet, sailing under the command of James, Duke of York, is the most powerful battle fleet yet assembled. At daybreak, near Sole Bay, de Ruyter finds the combined English and French fleet at its most vulnerable, anchored and loading supplies. As the Dutch close in, the French squadron sails south as planned earlier with the Duke of York. De Ruyter now sees his chance for victory. He sends his smallest squadron to block the French and concentrates his larger squadrons on the English, who are now outnumbered. As they sail north, the English are trapped between land, the superior Dutch force blasting them from windward, and just ahead, red sand shoals. In utter desperation, the English tack away from the shoals and directly into a massive melee with the more numerous Dutch. The Dutch inflict heavy damage on the English fleet, including the Royal James, one of the largest of the English first-rate 100-gun ships, which they board, capture, and burn. As the larger French fleet sails back toward the battle, de Ruyter collects his fleet and sails into the North Sea with one of his greatest victories. De Ruyter's fleet inflicts so much damage on the English fleet that it eliminates the possibility of an Anglo-French invasion by sea for the rest of the year. But on land, the Dutch year of disaster continues unabated. Louis XIV's army advances virtually unopposed through the eastern Dutch provinces to the borders of Holland and Zeeland. De Witt, blamed for the catastrophe, rapidly loses the last vestige of political support and resigns. William III takes over the command of all Dutch forces and organizes their last desperate stand.
William III now was stadtholder and commander of the army, The only way the Republic was going to survive was to flood the whole area from the big rivers to the middle of the Netherlands. So they flooded it. The French could still have crossed if they had realized what was happening. But by the time they tried to cross, the water was to the depth of horses' necks and they couldn't get their army across.
The Dutch situation really was desperate. They are still politically heavily divided. And as this war unfolds, the Orangists get more and more powerful. And in the middle of the war, De Witt and his brother are thrown out of power, lynched by an Orangist mob, and hideously murdered.
Johan de Witt, the bold, intelligent, patriotic leader of the Dutch for 2 decades, is dead. He stopped a war the Dutch could not win, the First English War, and was the architect of the peace they did win after the Second War. He made the cumbersome Dutch federal system work while preserving their hard-won personal and religious freedoms. It was a horrific death for a national hero at the hands of a mindless mob.
Our deepest sympathy with you, Mikhail. The De Witts were your dear friends and comrades, and they always placed their trust in you. Johan was my mentor too, and I only wish he were here to counsel us in this perilous time.
No one would ever prove William III's complicity in De Witt's death. The fate of the nation now rests with his leadership. He is ready to take charge and has a strategy for survival.
Can you mend with Tromp here?
Mend we must. Our enemies beset us.
I will follow you, Admiral, and obey.
We must take the English out of the war, and soon.
We can strike before they expect us.
And the French will not fight. Louis will order them to stand off and watch while the English and us grind each other.
Good. If you can stop the English from landing a force this year, we can survive on land south and east with God's help and protection. Tromp, the Reiter, the eyes and hearts of all the inhabitants of this country, indeed, of all the Christian world, follow your fleet. Evertson, Charles, my uncle, speaks of you with affection. He calls you Kay's the Devil.
He was gracious to me just before the last war. Released me after capture because our family was kind to him during his exile.
Evertson, we need you with the Reutzer again this season, but when it ends, you will have a special commission to seize the English East Indies convoy as it returns.
Where?
Near their base at St. Helena on the South Atlantic.
And if I miss there?
Go west to America. Do what damage you can.
At the end of the year, Evertson's expedition sails. But it has the misfortune of running into a more powerful English fleet at Cape Verde. The larger English fleet blocks Evertson from the South Atlantic, so he sets sail for America. Approaching Martinique, he sees a fleet on the horizon.
And as he closed with it, he prepared for battle and was relieved when this other fleet of 6 ships raised the States General's flag. He had blundered by sheer fortune into another fleet from Holland, from the Admiralty of Amsterdam.
The Dutch fleets combine to raid English plantations in America.
The expeditions were very successful. They leapfrogged up the island chain, destroyed a large piece of the English tobacco fleet, and decided to sail on.
Their next stop is New York.
We arrived off Manhattan at the end of July and met with a Dutch delegation from Brooklyn and Vlissingen. They pleaded with us to restore their government. We dispatched a sloop to the commander of the English fort with a demand for his immediate surrender. They responded arrogantly, asking by whose authority we made our demand. I told them, you can see by our ships and flags who we are. Our commission issues from the barrels of our cannons. With no word from them, we loaded our Marines into boats to land, about 600, and began to shell the fort. After an hour, they raised a white flag.
While Evertson sets up a new government in New Netherland, the war across the Atlantic continues. Charles needs a victory. The war, now in its second year, is unpopular. Dutch privateers decimate English trade. Parliament reluctantly votes funds to continue, but will not support another year of war without a decisive victory. In addition, Parliament passes an act requiring all high office holders to swear an oath condemning Catholicism. Unwilling to submit to the oath, James, Duke of York, resigns from the Navy, leaving Charles with Prince Rupert to command the fleet for the planned invasion of the Netherlands.
This time, the English want to invade Holland themselves. They actually have an invasion army ready to go across. They have the boats to go across. And this time, the Anglo-French fleet is meant to support that invasion.
But the invasion cannot take place until the Anglo-French fleet knocks out de Ruyter's fleet.
All summer, de Ruyter very skillfully kept his smaller fleet behind his own shoals and avoided a major battle. There have been a couple of smaller conflicts. In August, de Ruyter has come out to escort in the returning East India fleet.
The large Anglo-French fleet sails in battle line to destroy de Ruyter. But their formation soon falls apart.
The rear squadron drop back to fight the Dutch admiral of the rear squadron, Tromp. The French do very little all day. And of course, it's said that they've been under orders from Louis XIV not to fight, to let the English and the Dutch hammer it out. So Prince Rupert's squadron in the centre is left on its own against de Ruyter's squadron. As a result, the Dutch achieve their objective. They keep the control of the sea, and Rupert has to retire back to Britain with the inevitable recriminations afterwards, accusations against the French, accusations against Rupert himself.
The English Parliament has constantly opposed fighting on the side of the French. With political pressure from all sides and insufficient subsidies from Louis, Charles agrees to peace with his nephew William.
My captains, I applaud you, as do our thankful people. With this treaty, England depart the war.
We have taken Charles off the French payroll and put him on ours at 20% of what he demanded less than a year ago.
Everton will be unhappy we return New Amsterdam, and saluting their flag always stuck in my throat.
Bet for a small indemnity and a point of etiquette, we can save our country from Louis's grasp. Neither Zeeland nor Holland wanted New Amsterdam. It could not be held profitably.
The English duplicate themselves so quickly, like rabbits. Soon the whole colony will suffocate under the small turds of the Anglo babies.
Since the whole war had been fought at sea, it was easy to make peace on the terms of no gains on either side. The idea of New York did cross some people's minds, but the Dutch weren't terribly interested. They had bigger fish to fry in economic terms in other parts of the world.
We yield New Amsterdam, but we gain clear title to Suriname and 4 sugar islands and rights to many fisheries. And I am, of course, Charles's favorite again. He writes, I would have you know that although my own affairs oblige me to hasten the peace, I could not have had any comfort nor security in it if it did not see you so established.
There is talk of James's daughter for you, so who can tell?
Yes, you might be the next King of England.
William now has supreme command of both army and navy, as well as the highest civil office in every province. He builds alliances with Spain and Austria and leads large allied armies to lift the French siege of Dutch cities. he wisely lets de Ruyter continue his extraordinary command of the Navy. Winning victory after victory against all odds, de Ruyter assures his place among the great naval commanders in the history of the world. Meanwhile, Charles' attention is drawn to domestic concerns.
We'll never know quite how much influence Charles's girlfriends had. One of the most apparently influential was Barbara Villiers, Countess of Castlemaine. She's certainly got a temper, and she's certainly got plenty of ambition, and the king dotes on her. He's in love with her all through the 1660s.
Peeps, see there? My competitor for the king's affection. Louis' spy and whore.
No, she can no longer serve Louis now. Charles makes her an English duchess.
Duchess? Oh, is that now the title for a whore with a high price?
The king will soon acknowledge her son and establish a living for him.
As he did mine, after I threatened to bash our baby's brains out.
Right here at Whitehall, during a ball, as I remember. You have flair, my lady. Ah, here comes the Duke of York.
Yes, he beats the bushes for a new wife.
It was James, Duke of York, who was the key to William III's future as king. James gave his daughter Mary in marriage to William. And as important, James publicly announced himself Catholic soon after his first wife died.
Oh, here also comes Charles and his French whore. I leave you with them.
The girlfriend of Charles II, who was really hated by the English and suspected of being massively influential, was the one he had all through the 1670s and until his death, Louise de Keroualle, who he makes Duchess of Portsmouth.
James, I have for you the perfect match. Mademoiselle Delboeuf, the daughter of the Duke.
How does she compare to the widow of the Duc de Guise?
She is the Guise opposite. Young, pretty, smart, without the baggage of a large fortune or a large family.
But James still needs a large fortune. I was feeding the birds in St. James's Park, attended only by Lauderdale and Berkeley. James rode up, surrounded by his guards. The Duke feared that my life might be endangered by so small attendance. No kind of danger, James, said I. For no man in England would end my life to make you king.
Charles II died of natural causes in 1685. His legacy? Charles created the Royal Navy, the cornerstone of British global dominance for the next 2 centuries. He acquired trading posts in New York and Africa that ensured England access to the wealth of 2 continents. Sidestepping an obstinate parliament, he secured religious freedom for his new colonies in America, the Carolinas, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And for his brother James, he delivered the British throne intact.
James II, of course, was a Catholic, and to be a Catholic, a Protestant nation at this date is an exceedingly difficult trick to pull off.
James is not just a Catholic, he's an authoritarian. He wants to impose his will on the country. And that combination of his Catholicism and his authoritarianism leads to a revolt.
With a large part of the English nation disaffected with James, William III led a Dutch invasion of England, an extremely risky undertaking. But with broad support in England, including the English Army and Navy, William's bold move was successful. William and his wife Mary, James' daughter, became the King and Queen of England.
William III is a Dutchman, and he brings with him Dutch ideas about finance and capital and about the modern state. Under William III, England goes from a ramshackle, poor country to a remarkably rich and resilient country capable of fighting for decades.
He combines the English and Dutch forces into a large coalition against Louis XIV. This is then the theme for the decades to come.
It's William's constitutional state that gives you the great power of the 18th century, which allows the Royal Navy to be wielded effectively by a much richer and more powerful state. So it's not about the Navy. The Navy is fine under James and Charles. It's the state that needs reforming. That comes in 1688. And after that, you can date the rise of England to global power.
William III also extended religious freedom by ramming a Toleration Act through Parliament. Although it proscribed English monarchs from being Catholic and restricted some religious practices, the Toleration Act virtually eliminated arbitrary religious persecution by the state. A hard-won victory for freedom of conscience and religion in England and in all of her American colonies.